This is International Master Eric Kislik. Let's jump straight into Game 6 between Liren and Gukesh in the World Championship match. So let's talk about the opening of this one, which started off as a London system. I've had a lot of students who play the London system, and typically what I'll tell them is take a look at your London system games and basically decide, well, did I achieve what I wanted to achieve from the opening in these games? So, for instance, I had a student who 4 times out of 5, they got a pretty convincing advantage from the opening. And I said, well, would you have expected to get more with something else? You could certainly play something like a Schandorf repertoire or an Avruk repertoire, something like that. But if you're doing well in a line, keep playing it until you're not doing well with that anymore. If you find that people are playing the best line and you're absolutely getting nothing and you're running into this brick wall that you can't really break down, then sure, you shake it up a bit. But I think that what Ding did in this game was pretty good. And some would say that he got the most to play with in this game compared to the other games with White. So, for example, in the previous game, I thought he had some chances to press a little bit, but it fizzled out really quickly. This one, he had much more tangible chances. Okay, so standard setup with e6 and then c5. Typically what they're going to do is fight against the strong centralized piece with bishop to d6. This is a popular setup that really was essentially unknown in 2012, 2013, and then Magnus started playing it around 2016, 2017. And he played many games with it. He played it against Wesley So. He played against other top players. And people started to realize, wow, this is just a great answer to the London. Now, knight bd2 is also a common move where black will typically play this and go bishop to d6. So let's say here I go bishop d6. Now, the best that white can typically do here is just try to go for some complications. And that may involve playing b4 and c4 after castling. Castle, castle. Now I go b4, then I take, and then I play c4. And it's essentially just trying to say, well, I have a little bit more space here, and maybe it might not be that easy for you to resolve the central tension. That's about the best that you can go for in this kind of a position. So let's say take, and then knight d4. You would essentially try to argue, well, I have slightly more active knights. But objectively, I think black is okay here. Bishop d5, a4, a6. Yeah, objectively, black should be okay here, but this is one of the trickier things you can try. Okay, so Ding goes c3, bishop to d6. Yeah, and a typical way that the game might develop, let's say you play this. I have seen people do this where they just allow the doubled pawns because it's trying to anchor the knight with knight e5 when they take. So let's say castles, knight e5, bishop to d3. And I can just go rook c1 here, and knight df3. Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting way to play. The biggest problem is that they can fight against that knight with knight e4 and typically stuff like f6. And so, yeah, you're probably just going to have to accept equality here after knight e4. So anyway, he goes for bishop e5 check. I thought that was a really interesting choice. Knight c6, take, 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 take. So we're basically hoping to create something of a weakness to play against. Queen a4, castles, queen a3. Now, this had been played before, but I still thought it was really interesting preparation. Knight e4, knight fd2. So black obviously needs his own counterplay because of this issue here. So because black clearly needs his own counterplay here, like for example, you don't want to play something like c takes d4. I can just take on I'll take on e4. He takes on a3. I go knight takes a3. So let's say something like this: take, 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 and then I simply take here. Now you just have a worse structure. You have 2 isolated pawns. You have doubled pawns. The knight is excellent. Might go to a square like a5 or e5. So white would definitely be better there. So e5 was played. Take, take, queen takes. So it was a pawn sacrifice, but the idea is it's a bit difficult to play this without queenside castling. So he actually plays it kind of as a temporary pawn sacrifice, and then he gets the pawn back with d takes e5. All right, so rook to b8, and obviously he's relying on something of a pin here. Knight c4, still defending b2. Now I have to play rook d2, got to secure b2. Hitting the rook here with queen f3, got to move the rook over. Take and take. Now there was definitely discussion here about rook bd8. Yeah, I mean, I also understand what Gukesh played. I actually didn't really think it was that bad. I mean, if he just thinks about it from the perspective of, well, I want to keep the queens on the board for as long as possible, I'm just going to centralize my pieces. It does make you wonder, I mean, does he actually have any real problems in defense? Take, queen takes a2, queen takes c4. I can come back with queen b1, but yeah, I mean, even if you see this line here, check, queen b1, queen a4, even though white's up a pawn, white's not able to actually win that. So queen f5 was played. Yeah, I definitely agree with people here who said that he should not have spent 40 minutes with queen takes c6. I think in a lot of these types of positions, you have to use deductive reasoning and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to have to take the c6 pawn. There's really no way around it. Because I'm going to have to take the c6 pawn, I should just take it right away and go for mass centralization. And one point that I did not see mentioned by basically any of the grandmasters who commented on this game, maybe they haven't even heard this before in certain cases, is this becomes a battle of whose majority is more mobile. And clearly it's white's with the protected pass c pawn after queen takes c6. And so the problem with Ding's play is just that he spent too much time. Now, there was a lot of discussion about rook ed1. I heard a lot of people saying plus equals. I mean, the problem is this. Okay, I give myself luft. I play a5. I mean, the problem here is how exactly are you going to advance your pawns up here? So let's say I play this, rook fd8. Take. I play this, and then I play a4. And, I mean, the real problem here is that white's king is so exposed that you can't really make an argument for white being better here, unfortunately. Just can't really make the argument here with the king this exposed. So you also have to be careful. You also have to be careful in looking at this kind of a position with low depth engine score and saying, oh, white's clearly better. I would say from a practical perspective, white is certainly for choice and certainly has an easier plan. Notice white's majority is able to get moving a little bit while black's can't. But I'm probably less harsh on what Ding played here. I mean, here's the other thing that you do in your preparation. You test to see if your opponent finds a good answer to your opening idea. And that is what I've said in previous games. I mean, for example, I wasn't that critical of Ding's play in Game 4. Because, again, it's the same kind of thing that John Nunn talked about in Secrets of Practical Chess. Sometimes your opponent just has a really good answer. You go back to the drawing board, you tweak it, you improve it. And then the next time you come back and you have something a bit more nuanced, a bit more subtle, and it works out a little better. But yeah, I have queen c6. There's not really much here. So if white wanted to deviate in another way, I mean, can't really claim plus equal here. So queen d5. Okay, so he declines the draw with queen h4. A really interesting choice. And I liked what he said in the press conference too. He said, well, I was going to play some more moves, and if the position's very drawish, then maybe I offer a draw back or we repeat moves. But I think that's generally good advice. I mean, let's say you're playing a higher rated player who outrates you by 100 points. If they offer you a draw in a position where, I mean, I'm talking about a position that's not an obvious clear draw. And, you think, well, why exactly are they offering me that draw? Maybe they feel like they're under pressure. If they feel like they're under pressure, I would say at least play a couple moves, play 4 or 5 moves and see if you can make progress. If you can make no progress without harming your position, then taking a draw is fine then, but you should press them first. And Of course, that depends. Is it tactical or not? I mean, if it's super tactical and you're very low on time, okay, then you can take a draw. But if you have plenty of time and it's not that tactical, then it's very reasonable to just keep playing. All right, so here's a moment that I didn't really see basically any discussion on. Queen e5. I actually gave that a dubious mark. And the reason why is because he can start advancing his majority right away. So say here, I go queen d4. Now I take on e4. They trade queens. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think this is the kind of thing that even if the computer at super high depth is convinced that this is a draw, it's a very interesting way to play by getting that passed pawn going already. Like, for example, you take a position like this, I mean, maybe you push this pawn up and go after that isolated pawn. Maybe get a position like this where your pawn is simply much more dangerous than the passed f pawn. And yeah, I mean, if you're ahead on the clock here by 20, 30 minutes, I mean, this could have been Ding's best chance with white so far in the match. So queen e5 was played, rook b e8. Yeah, I mean, good moves by Gukesh here. Queen g3. I also gave another line. Oh, I mean, it's basically repeating for a move. Then I go queen a5. I mean, it's an interesting way to play, but yeah, admittedly not a whole lot going on here. I'm just trying to be solid with the queen. Yeah, let's say I take here. Problem is they just play this. They scoop up the pawn on a2. Can't really make much of an argument for white being better here with this exposed king. All right, so queen g3 was played. Yeah, now there was definitely a debate here. Should he keep the queens on or should he trade? Now, I will say there's a practical argument for queen h5. The practical argument for queen h5 is it's actually very difficult to prove any kind of edge from white's perspective. So playing queen h5 actually does make a good deal of sense, just from a practical perspective. But if you're trying to draw here, of course you play the rook lift and you swing the rook over to attack the isolated pawn. So let's say here, rook g5, h5, king b2. Now, what I would argue here is that black's king is relatively close, and here I have this nice little sliding move, kind of a nice move, give it an exclam. Take, I play h4, I play this, and I go king to d6. Now, if they play b6, I can just catch the pawn. So I think that this was the cleanest way to draw, but I will give Gukesh credit for this move, which, although I consider it dubious objectively, it's very hard to refute in a real game. And in the game, he actually had no real problems. And I think that the super deep analysis of this position, it was analyzed very shallowly in most of the analysis that I saw. So now I was looking at what if I go rook d4, rook e5 is a good rook lift. Excellent move. I have ideas like this, or rook g5. Say here I go rook fe8. Now I go rook f5. Say here, can play a4. Nice, good, active move. Not afraid if they take the pawn. They have the doubled and isolated a pawns exposing their king. Yeah, I mean, I had been analyzing moves like this and basically just thought, yeah, black is just so solid here. Rook g2 and rook e2. Yeah, this should really be a draw. So queen f4. I think that Ding played the best move here. I didn't really see people comment on this move, but it was actually quite a nice move, simply because I think it does a better job of trying to be prophylactic. So I said queen a5. Gukesh plays aggressively with his queen and seeks to keep it active throughout the rest of the game. And now another way to play is just to go a5. Let's say I go a4, queen f3 like in the game, queen g5, king g7. Yeah, one of the problems is that there is a lot of activity over here. Let's say I go rook e1, queen h4, rook f2. Go for rook f2 after this. So I go rook f2, check, and then rook d1. Yeah, I mean, a very interesting way to play. Very interesting way to play. I do think white is slightly better here, but I also think white's slightly better after queen a5. Now, I will say one thing about this, in all the analysis that I saw here, everybody just skipped over this moment. This was one of the most critical moments of the game because, again, if you think about it from the perspective of comparison that I often like to talk about, what's the difference between a3 and king to b1? Well, when you go king b1, it helps you push the c-pawn with your king more tucked away and hidden from checks. So it makes your king a little bit safer and makes the c-pawn a bit easier to push. So I actually gave king b1 an exclamation mark. I did actually analyze this position for 2 or 3 hours, actually, looking for the biggest advantage I could. And it is really solid for black. That's the downside here. I'll show you a couple lines I looked at. I looked at, what if I push the pawn right away? They go f5, and I go rook d6. Problem here is that they do have that a4, that a5, a4 pawn break. Even if I get this, queen a7, going after the king, trade queens, and then f4. Yeah, f4 is a big move, getting that e-pawn strong. So that should have only been equal. Now, at the same time, when you look at all this, this I think was better. And I think that if Ding had gone for this, let's say queen d4, f5, queen c4, already kind of critical. Queen a6, trying to break the pin. Queen c7, challenging the queen. Queen f4. And now my key idea with white is h4, h5. I think if Ding could have gotten something like this, because look at the move number. It's move 37 here for white. If he could have put this kind of pressure on Gukesh, now he challenges the queen again, I think that would have been really interesting. So let's say I go here. Now I'm looking at ideas of going h5. What was very interesting is when I checked this with the computer, it initially gave this move rook to d7 a score of +1. But the problem was, once I just play solidly, and now I have a nice defensive idea, I take and I go queen g6. And I'm just being annoying with the queen. I have queen h6 in some lines, queen g4 in some lines. Just really annoying, persistent play with the queen. Check, king h8, rook 6 f7, and then I come here. And I did say that in this line, this was best play for white. I do think white is better here. I've made this a backward pawn. I've isolated these pawns, so I'm almost definitely gonna win something here. I still have my protected pass pawn on c3. So I think that if Ding could have gotten this position on move 37, he would have had, 47 at this point. He would have had excellent winning chances. And the whole thing would have looked like very clever preparation. The other line that I looked at is c4, queen h6, check, queen e5, f4, good move, take. Yeah, the one downside here is that the play just gets a little too simplified. Take, rook e7, and I could take on a7. I could also play a3. I said white's a little bit better here. I think if they had played this, they probably would have had a draw. But I think that this line in a world championship match on move 47, where you maybe are playing this position with only, 15 minutes left, 10 minutes left on the clock, where white clearly has the safer king, clearly has more pressure. All the pressure's on black here. I think if he could have gotten this is probably about the maximum type of advantage he could have gotten here. The other move that I looked at was this, h5, queen f4, queen g6. Now he goes for queen g4, like I said, harassing the queen. Rook g6, queen d4, I take the pawn, they push the pawn up. So they're trying to compensate for the pawns that we have by their own strong pass pawn. Go rook g3 over here, rook d7, queen f6, rook e7. And I said white is slightly better after playing rook e6 here. Play rook e6 and I play king a2. Although the one downside to playing this way is it does feel a little bit dangerous just with that h pawn down there on h3. But yeah, I mean, we're on move 52. I think Ding would have had fantastic chances. The last line that I looked at was after queen f6, rook e6, just playing queen f4. And just saying, all right, well, let's say they play this. I go rook d5. And now I have ideas like trying to roll the pawns up. I come here, I can go c4. Then there are also the lines with h4, h5. So I think this is also a pretty good advantage. But of the long lines that we looked at, I think that the best one that we looked at was this one, where we went deep into this check, queen c7, and then we have queen f4. Have the safer king. They have more weaknesses. It's move 47. You could get very nervous with black here with this kind of exposed king here. So I think that would have been the most dangerous of all the options. A3 was played. Most people didn't even comment on this, just said, oh yeah, it's just a typical move. But that's why it's so important to compare critical moves here. So queen b5, I thought that was an excellent move by Gukesh. He's basically just arguing, oh, I have an annoying queen, and I'm just going to latch on to things. I'm going to attack stuff. I'm going to attack, as many pawns as I can. So I also analyzed h4 here, which, again, I saw nobody comment on this. Rook d4, rook 1 d2. I gobble up that pawn here. Now, certainly an argument to be made here for black that it's very hard for white to do anything with his extra pawn, but I am up a pawn. I do have everything guarded. I have kind of stopped everything. So my argument here is h4 would have been as good as anything else. But I do think Ding played well here. Rook d4, queen e2, rook 1 d2. Yeah, the problem here is like, okay, let's say I check. When I play this in king b1, rook b8, threatening the c3 pawn. I just go king a1, getting out of the way, so there's no danger there. Now I go queen d6, and I go h4. And then I can just play here. Play here in queen e7. And I do think white is slightly better here. I do think white's slightly better here, but that would have been a perfectly playable line. Now, there was a lot of criticism of Ding right here going into the ending. Now, I don't think he should have gone into the ending, but I do also want to stress that the computer will often give a score of like +1, but if you go deeper and deeper and you have table bases on your engine and everything like that, and the latest version of Stockfish, or Leela, or whatever, you're going to conclude that queen g5, check, king c2, queen e1. The problem here is this queen is just so annoying. And so the computer gives a really high score. You play out the lines with best play, and it really does not lead to much. So I analyzed a couple different lines. I'll just show you a couple of these just so that this analysis is full. All right, so this is kind of a clever move, h6. I'm trying to decoy the queen away so I can gain access to the d file. h6, queen g3, king g7, h5. Here I have this nice plan of running the king out. Now, once again, would have been very interesting if Ding went for something like this. The one thing you might feel, though, is like, maybe I could lose it, too, because of that h-pawn. So I understand maybe not going into that. Again, like maybe the safest line I showed before, where black had the weaknesses and white was risking nothing. So here's another line where we chase the queen back. I go rook d6, check, king c1, say queen c4. I did analyze a couple different moves here. One of the ideas I looked at was to just go h4 like we saw previously, chase the queen away, chase the queen away again, and play the rook b4 idea. Yeah, this was definitely a typical area of discussion. h6, queen a5, take, queen e6. And once again, trading off a pair of rooks seemingly favors white slightly. And I think this is a nice move going into this ending, and you could certainly make the argument white's slightly better here. So there were a number of different tries. Here's one of the last ones. I go rook 6 to d2. I could also go here, kind of like before, king a1. Also slight edge for white. One of the problems is just that annoying queen. So I can play this. Here I had one last interesting idea. I go here. I play rook 1 to d2 here, protect the king. I go king b1. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull the queen back. King g7, a4, and then I go queen g1. Yeah, it would have been really interesting. Would have been really interesting if Ding had played out something like this very deeply. And you know what? It could easily be that under other circumstances. Like, here's another thing that Ding's not getting credit for. Let's say Black was behind 30 minutes on the clock. Ding might be hungry in this kind of a situation if he was way ahead on the clock. But when Black's doing fine, he seems comfortable. Yeah, I mean, it's again, which one do I want? Do I want this position? Do I want this position? I like this. It's comfortable. But, this is more complex. Move 51, a lot going on here. I'll show you one other thing here. Queen G3, Queen F1. Here's another thing I analyzed. This is also interesting. If I go Queen F4, Queen A1, trying to hit this pawn, Rook B4. Black's probably equalizing here. I said White's slightly better. I mean, I am guarding B2. I am kind of guarding everything. Going to be hard to push the pawns, but a very slight edge. And this was the last thing I looked at. I looked at Queen E2, Queen D1. So I'm just going to try to trade queens off and try to win the 4-rook ending here. So I go Rook B4. I have another nice idea. I have Queen F1 with the idea of Queen C4. Try to force the queens off the board. Try to see if I could maybe win this ending. And the basic argument in the ending is my majority is more mobile than theirs. So I at least have a practical advantage. And if they take, I have connected passed pawns. So I think that this would be a very, very interesting idea. A very, very interesting idea for Ding to play. You're basically just deciding, where is my edge the biggest? Is it the biggest here? Is it the biggest here? Or is it the biggest here? I think this looks like a pretty good advantage to be playing with, especially if they let you trade queens and you have the rook ending. But this one also looks quite good in the 4-rook ending. So both of those would have been very good chances. Maybe slightly less than one of the previous variations with the exposed king for Black, but I think that would have been best. So he just played King C2, Queen takes F4, F5, H4. This is an interesting move, stopping G5 by Black. And some people criticized Gukesh here. I actually thought this was quite logical what he did. He just played this. He plays Rook E7. Yeah, I mean, how are you actually going to surround the pawn? You really can't surround the pawn. So pawn can't be surrounded. He plays H5. Yeah, good typical move. Temporary pawn sacrifice, just weaken stuff. Goes here, H4. Yeah, logical. I go check the king away. King G7, Rook G2 check. Obviously here, you can't walk the king up. You just get mated by the 2 rooks, so that would be a very ugly way to lose the game. So he just goes back and repeats. Rook E2, getting in front of that passed pawn, check. King H8, Rook E2, King G7. So I actually thought this was a very well-played game by both sides. I think that Gukesh did have pretty good intuition in that endgame, but like we saw, there were lines where White could get something like this, have the pawns rolling, or this line. I mean, this I argued was basically the biggest edge White could get. But I do give credit to Gukesh for playing it out because, if he senses that his opponent is a little bit nervous and doesn't want to play out the ending, maybe White could have exposed his king. I mean, he basically said something like, I always have counterplay here, and that does make sense. I mean, even if the computer says 0.5 in some of the positions, if you do have that counterplay, it can go a long way. But I think I did highlight a number of interesting and deep moves that were not mentioned anywhere else. So I think this is interesting theoretical analysis on this World Championship match. All this is on Lee Chess in a public study, so I think very interesting to look through on your own if you're curious. And anyway, we're going to see the next game coming up pretty soon in a few hours, so I will talk to you then. Have a good one. Bye-bye.